Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not averse to repeating myself once in a while. This is Mathew Sands. He's done a video reply to my video reply to him.
And that's what the Nations of Sanity is about, making that principle the law, the universal law, established through a peace agreement, and it is our assertion...
That's this guy. The peace agreement. The law that's the peace agreement. Well, is it a law or is it a peace agreement? See if I can get that a little... That's better, right? I don't know if it's better or worse. I don't know if it matters. Alright. Is it a law or is it a peace agreement? No, it's the law established through a peace agreement. How many people need to do it? I don't know. So that's this guy.
This is the only way to create a truly free society where everybody has truly equal rights.
What? You didn't go over that at all. The only way to do this is through this agreement, and he doesn't know how many people have to agree. Would it be 10%, 30%, 50, 70? Once we get it set, it's law. So he's going to have law, and is he going to have government? Is there a government behind this, Matthew? No, we all just agree amongst ourselves, except some of us who don't agree. But then there will be arbitration or something.
And this is what Brandon had to say about it.
I think you're a moron who's about 3 inches away from being charged with treason by the FBI, which is on a hair trigger nowadays.
Now, I didn't know he was in Britain. He's got more to fear from the Muslims just changing his society over to Sharia before he has any chance to try to affect any change in the courts.
That's what I think.
And just to give a little background to how this interaction began, I left...
Alright, now we can skip forward a bit because this isn't substantive. Now I have my say for a bit. Not much, though.
Phrase you like. But it will be established through a peace agreement. So it's the law established through a peace agreement.
If it's a law, then find a government to pass it and enforce it. Because that's what a law is.
Would a peace agreement... What if everybody went to their local voting station and voted for a guy, and then all those guys from around the country gathered somewhere and talked about it, so that each one of them was voted on, and then they talked about it and agreed? Would could those guys pass your peace agreement?
That requirement is clearly not lost on him, so he recognizes he needs to make it a law. In fact, it is part of why I assert that the non-aggression principle needs to be established as law. I thought laws were aggression.
No, laws are not aggression. The law against rape is not...
So here we're about to embark on a very confused and contorted conflation of rights. He doesn't know what rights are. He has no idea what rights are, and he has these things called self-ownership, and he has this thing called self-defense, and he has absolutely no idea what rights are. So, Matthew, let me just give you a little primer. There's nobody in this universe except individual human beings, and they're the only ones with rights. And the only types of rights they have are the right to their own life. That's it. So rights are pretty limited. Now, if that person violates somebody else's right to their life, then we can punish them. Otherwise, we have to leave them be. Okay? That's the principle. That's the only principle you need. Hurting other people, bad. Leaving other people alone, good. What that person does to themselves is none of our business. Now, I know that today drugs are illegal and so on. I know that the governments today have stupid laws. I'm not talking about that. You're talking about some principled anarchist society, and I'm talking about the principles that society ought to run on. And the principles that society ought to run on is that you can't hurt other people, and they can't hurt you. That's the only principle that society ought to, that force that ought to be used on or for, is to protect your rights. Now, He's going to go through, he's going to say that drugs should be legal because of self-ownership or some garbage like that. Just a bunch of nonsense. You're just getting yourself into a mess. Even if you come out to the same answers as me, it took you 9 years to work out your garbage. And I didn't have to take that long. All I said was, did it hurt somebody else? No, then it's legal. Jump off a bridge, is that legal? Did it hurt anybody? Only you. Okay, you can do it. As long as it didn't hurt anybody else.
The law against murder is not aggression. The law against theft is not aggression.
That's non-aggression, to have a law against murder. Well, here's a question for you. What if somebody commits murder? Who avenges them? Because the person who's around they're not there to go to their protection agency and lodge a complaint against their abuser.
People can still talk about how modern-day police are funded through the theft of taxation, and there's obviously aggression attached to that.
Taxation's adjusted by people that we vote for. It goes up and down over time. Right? Now, of course, if you don't pay your taxes, a man with a gun comes. But, Matthew, let me just ask you, how would you have it in your society? Would you have it 5% or 10%? You think would be sort of a reasonable amount that people would pay for the government? I mean, you admit that they would pay something, right? And it wouldn't be government, right? It'd be some sort of stupid protection agency, right? But how much exactly do you think people are going to pay? 5%, 10, 20, 30, 50? I mean, right now it's around 40 in America and like 60 in Canada. And probably 70 in Europe, I don't know. But what do you think it should be? Where do you think it should be? What would you willingly, voluntarily pay? Now, if you would willingly, voluntarily pay 20%, let's say, and today in America it's at 40%, then we're roughly about double where we are. Is that call for violent revolution, destroying society and starting over? Is that call for chucking out all the laws and all the jurisprudence we've built up over hundreds of years? Because you want to cut tax rates in half and have them be voluntary, admittedly? Like, you're so mad that it's not voluntary taxation. And I'm with you on that. I'm particularly upset about taxation without representation, right? That's the real beef, right? So as long as we have representation, we have a say in how much our taxes are, let's just admit that we're going to pay something for our government. Can you admit that? We're going to pay something for police, courts, military, right? What's it going to be? 10%? 20%? Now, I admit that it would be lower in a free society. I admit that drugs should be legal. Sure, I admit these things, but we're still going to have some sort of money we're going to have to pay. What is your violent revolution? Why are you throwing out the society we have? How much better is it going to be? Half as much taxes? I mean, why is this? What is this revolution about?
Simply having a law against rape is itself not aggression. Having a law against any kind of drug use, for example, or having a law against gambling, or having a law against prostitution, is aggression. And the difference is...
Now, I can solve that for you. Just change those laws. Okay? Now, maybe he's not an anarchist. I don't know. Are you in favor of government? No, you don't want government, right? The government's bad, right? We just have to, that's right, it's agreement. Everything's agreement.
Law against rape is just a defensive act. It's a declaration of force on...
All laws, all proper laws, all good laws, all objective laws are defensive, Matthew. All objective laws are defensive. Now, you might go out and find some law that's not defensive and attacks somebody, and I'll say, okay, let's get that off the books. As a philosopher, I can't defend it and won't defend it. Okay? All defensible laws are defensive laws. Okay? They defend individual rights. All legitimate law is of this kind. So for you to sit here and say, there's this kind of law that we should do this, and that kind of law we should do that, and the non-aggression principle, blah, 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 blah. It's nonsense. This is all just garbage.
Contingency that you initiate force against somebody else. It's basically saying, this is a declaration of defence. Whereas a law that interferes with your self-ownership is an act of aggression.
And self-ownership's junk. You are the agent that owns. Nobody owns you. Of course nobody can own you. People can't be owned.
So it's not that law is an act of aggression. Some laws are an act of aggression that exist today because they violate our self-ownership. This is also the difference, and I'll touch on this later, but this is also the difference between ruling people and not ruling people. Again, prohibiting somebody from rape, murder or theft is not ruling them. Again, that's just defending yourself or defending others. But having a law that says somebody can't use whatever drug they want to use, or they can't sell their body, or they can't gamble, or that sort of stuff, that is ruling them. So this is a distinction that I need to make clear with...
What if they were just elected to office and they passed this junky law and now they're out of office? Am I being ruled over by those people? That's a junky concept, ruling over other people. That's stupid. A law was made that is in violation of people's rights. We need to argue about it in our courts and in our legislative bodies and get it changed. It's not like a mind-bending, difficult thing. And I'll say, bad laws always get passed. They're always going to get passed. They're always going to have to be rewritten. The best thing that we can do is set down a lot of strictures on the government to stop them from even trying to write lots of different types of laws. Just say, if it's concerning this, you can't write a law about it. If it's about this, you can't write a law about it. If it's about this, you can't write a law about it. And just go on and have a whole list of them. The United States started out with a nice list of 10, and we've lengthened it.
And then obviously anybody else who's watching this, this is the difference. And this is the point of having the non-aggression principle be the law. Because enforcing the non-aggression principle is just an act of defense, whether it's defending yourself.
How about we take this non-aggression principle, which essentially is you have the right to your life and nobody can violate your right to your life. How about we just take that as our guide in life and try to get the laws in our society changed to reflect that? Right? Get the taxes lowered or even reduced to zero so that people can pay as much as they feel appropriate. Sure, let's do that. Why would you take exception to that?
It's defending others, it's an act of defense. And everything the non-aggression principle prohibits is just it's just prohibiting you from initiating force against others for violating their self-ownership, their self-rule. So,
who enforces that? Who says you can't initiate force against others? Oh, it's just an agreement. Somebody's going to initiate force. And they're going to say that they weren't. They're going to say that they were defending themselves.
Their basic freedom. Both me and Brandon do define freedom in this way, so this is a concept that he should be able to understand pretty well.
He says it needs to be established as a law rather than just being some floaty principle that different people interpret differently. Well, different people are going to interpret stuff differently. Let me promise you that. And that's why we have to have courts and judges and juries and lawyers.
Yes, people interpret stuff differently, which is why we need a universal standard, and that's the point of making the non-aggression principle.
People interpret stuff differently, which is why we need a universal standard. Do you even hear yourself? Do you even hear yourself, Matt? People are going to interpret stuff differently. It doesn't matter what standard you say to them. You can say, I've got a universal standard, and they're going to punch you in the face and shoot you. What are you going to do? When your universal standard gets shot in the face, what are you going to do? These people are criminals. You can't do anything with them but lock them up forever or kill them. I mean, what is your universal standard? If this is what we should use as intellectuals in the courts and in our legal bodies when we're writing the laws, fine. Bring this to the jurisdiction. Bring this to the law schools. Write a book about the theory of law. That's what you're dealing with here, is the theory of law. You're dealing with the theory of law, and you dismiss law. I mean, law is telling people what they must never do, under punishment of men with guns pursuing them to the ends of the earth. And you're theorizing about things that people should never do under heavy, heavy punishment. You're theorizing about law. This is not law. This is not morals. This is law.
Or through a peace agreement. And that's also why it specifically needs to be this three-part peace agreement, where you have the basic agreement established through...
There's no agreement about law. People are going to interpret it differently. And you say, we don't care what your interpretation is. We've written down that you cannot break into other people's houses. We don't care if you're hungry. We don't care if they were a Christian and you're a Muslim and Muslims have a right to terrorize Christians. We don't care. We are going to lock you up. We don't care about your interpretation. We don't care about your universal. We don't care about your agreement. We don't care if you were part of agreement. We don't care if you don't agree with our agreement. We're just going to lock you up if you do what we don't think is right. Now, Matthew, do you want to be part of that discussion and help us decide what is right and wrong? Because if so, I suspect you're going to sit down at the table and say things like, we need to legalize drugs and legalize prostitution, right? Because they don't hurt anybody's right. And I'm going to say, should we make murder legal? And you're going to say, no, of course not. Well, okay. Then we're going to have a government, and we're going to have laws, and we're going to have police enforcing it. And it doesn't matter whether people agree or not. So just drop that stupid language. That is just kindergarten language. Agreement doesn't matter. The philosophers will write the laws, and everybody else will follow them on pain of punishment. And they'll be rewritten every single day by legislatures and courts across the lands. Okay? They're not going to be set in stone, except the ones that we put down on paper and we say this is a very important one, and you all have to agree together if you're going to change it. These other ones you can change just willy-nilly. But to change these big ones, you all have to agree together. You have to get 2/3 or 3/4 or something. This is what you need to be putting your thoughts into. This is ridiculous what you're doing here. We've got an agreement, a peace agreement.
One, and then part two deals with the limits of tolerance over differing interpretations. So we can understand that there's grey areas.
Limits of tolerance. So what if they go beyond the limits of tolerance? This is where he says that there will be different interpretations, and we just have to say what is, and we'll just discuss this and argue it out, and we'll say what is the maximum. Beyond this, it's absurd, right? So up to here is good, beyond that's absurd. Anybody who's out there is being absurd. Who will be the judge of that, Matthew? Who will be the judge of what's absurd and what's reasonable? I can't. Is it going to be elected officials? Is it going to be philosopher kings? Is it going to be just the rabble, just the general mob, just decide for themselves? Who's going to decide these things? I mean, right now we decide these things by arguing them out in our law courts. You know? Well, how are you guys going to decide them? You're going to replace law courts with what? Law courts.
Where reasonable people can disagree over precisely where we draw the line, but there is a limit. There is a limit to how much people's differing interpretations, how much they can push that, to make sure they don't push it into absurdity.
When they do push it into absurdity, just know that they're going to be the reasonable one, and you're going to be the one that's in the absurdity. Okay? They're not going to be in absurdity when they push it into absurdity. You're going to be the one in absurdity for them. Okay? So, come up with a different system. I mean, my system is we don't really give a flying F what you think. We write down a law. You break the law. We prove to a court of your peers, a jury of your peers, that you broke the law, and you go kicking and screaming into a jail cell. So my interpretation of this is easy. I don't know what you're going to do, Matthew. Are you going to take a murderer who has gray lines about when he can murder and debate with him and say, well, that's going too far, that's absurd? Or is murder, can't murder, right? Well, what about when somebody's attacking you or planning to attack you? What about if they are actually planning to attack you and they are going to attack you and you know it? Can you defend yourself?
That they do not infect the black and white with these grey areas, we have to have limits of tolerance over the differing interpretations. So that is a solution to that issue. people have this
That's not a solution. That's you mumbling.
interpretations. We have this principle, which will get most of the way there. Once people understand the concept of self-ownership and the non-aggression principle, they're most of the way there.
So what we need is for people to understand this. Not for my laws, we don't. What we need is for society to vote for people who understand it. That's all we need. We don't need every single rabble-rouser out there in the community. We don't even need half of them. All we need is for them to vote on it. And then if they don't like it, they can vote again next year or the 2 years after or whatever. We don't need to get them to understand it. Now, if you're making extremely bizarre, complex laws that are, everywhere in society and are ruining society, that's different. I'm talking about protecting people's rights. You pass a law that protects people's rights, and then maybe there's new technology, and the government makes an announcement. Anybody using lasers within 5 miles of an airport runway will face a $10,000 fine and up to a year in prison. Just in case you didn't know, lasers are dangerous and you mustn't use them near airport runways. Once in a while there will be new technology and there will be an announcement. What are you going to do about that? You're going to have some stupid council sit down somewhere and define what the new technology of lasers is, and everybody will have to educate everybody and we'll come to an agreement about lasers.
There we have these grey areas. Part 2 is about setting limits of tolerance, the lines in the sand, as I call it, to mark out where we are saying, for sure, you're violating the non-aggression principle if you cross this line.
Who says for sure? You? Right?
And now we're jumping back to video 1, Brandon's first video, where we're still talking about the issue of threats and attempts to initiate force against people.
But the idea that people can use force to defend against non-aggression principle violations does not restrict them to after-the-fact responses. So you can act before somebody actually attacks you.
You're not restricted to after-the-fact responses. Right? The grammatical inversion of that is, you are allowed to act before the fact. You're not restricted to after the fact, so you are allowed to act before the fact. Right? Do I have to wait until after the fact? No, you do not have to wait until after the fact. Therefore, you can act before the fact. It's not even a therefore, it's just an inversion of the sentence. You're just taking the not out. You're just taking out the negative. Okay? So, he says, you don't have to wait. You can act before. Okay?
You can do a preemptive action on people. And it does allow them to act in response to threats or attempts to initiate force against peaceful people.
So if someone threatens you or attempts to initiate force against you, you can blank out. What can you do to them, Matthew? What can you do to them?
So you're saying that you would allow people to go out and attack people who have done nothing. But
can you do that then, Matthew? Can you go out and attack people who have done nothing?
But the person who goes and attacks them says that they feel like the person was going to do something.
That's what he says. He says, if you think someone's going to do something, you can go. It's defensive.
No, you can't.
Yeah, no, you did. You said it, Matthew. You said it. Are you this sloppy of a thinker, dude? This is pretty bad, Matthew.
Just attack somebody who's done nothing just because you said or you think or you feel that there's some kind of threat to you or you thought that they might do something.
You can't, then. So somebody can be a real threat to you, actually planning to attack you, saying they're going to attack you, and you can't do anything until the attack comes then. Is that what you're saying, Matthew? Is that what you're saying? Will you make up your mind about this? I say, if there's an imminent threat like that, you have to go to the police. And that person is now going to face, the retribution of the state. So now they're in deep. If they have been threatening me in a real way, blackmail or whatever it is, they are now in big trouble. So that's what I would do. What would we do in your society? You said if somebody's threatening you, you can answer. You can do something about it. You don't have to wait for them to attack you first. You can defend yourself. Oh, really? But now you're saying you can't. You have to wait for the attack. How are you going to answer this question? Mine's easy. You feel threatened, you go to the police.
You can use force in response to an initiation of force or an attempt or a threat to. So
you can then. Oh, so now he's reversed himself again. So he said, yes, you can. Then he said, no, you can't. Then he said, you can. Really? I'm just going to back up and let you see the whole spiel there.
You can't just attack somebody who's done nothing just because you said or you think or you feel that there's some kind of threat to you or you thought that they might do something. No. You can use force in response to an initiation of force or an attempt or a threat to. So
you can use force in response to an initiation of force or an attempt to use force. You can't use force. Now, when can you not use force?
You can't just attack somebody who's done nothing just because...
You can't attack someone who's done nothing just because...
You said or you think or you feel that that's...
Just because you think or feel
kind of threat to you. Or
that there's a feel or threat. You cannot attack someone just because you think or feel there's a threat.
That they might do something. No. You can use force in response to an initiation.
But you can use force in response to an initiation of force.
Or an attempt or a threat to.
Or an attempt or threat to use force. Matthew, is there anybody home? You just said those sentences back to back. Can you respond to somebody who you think is going to use force against you, or do you have to wait for the attack? My answer is simple. I call the police. If I think there's a real, objective, provable threat, I call the police. And I have guns and knives at home. I put in an alarm system in my house. Maybe I start walking with pepper spray in my pocket. Right? What are you going to do? What is your answer to that? Your answer is, no, you can't use force to respond to something you think might happen, but you can use force to respond to threats. Well, is a threat something that I think might happen? I mean, how closely do I have to define these words for you? Do you know what a threat is, Matthew? Hello? Hello, Matthew? Did you see the sentences you just said back to back? Jesus Christ. No, you can't initiate physical force, but you can initiate physical force. Or retaliate. No, you can't retaliate with physical force against a threat, but if someone threatens you, you can retaliate with physical force.
You can't just attack somebody who's done nothing just because you said or you think or you feel that there's some kind of threat to you or you thought that they might do something. No. You can use force in response to an initiation of force or an attempt or a threat to. So,
Matthew, hello? Jesus Christ.